Okay. All right, guys, thanks so much. Guys and girls, thanks so much for joining us. Um, you are just about done with the lecture piece of this class, and you're just about ready to progress toward having the ability to make a full project. And I know that because if you've made it this far, it's because you've done a lot of micro projects and you've exhibited a lot of interactive web development skills, especially related to cloud security. And last week with um, uploading images and URL params and all that. It's all a very full toolkit right here. There's just about everything you need. And so at this point, you're really thinking about the design. And of course, design within the web is responsive. It formats itself well to tablets as well as laptops as well as smartphones. And we do that because of the Bootstrap framework. What I want to show you is naturally a very basic example of Bootstrap. And you can see here this is very, very basic. And so let's just kind of start that. Let's take a look at the very basics here. So we'll go in here. We have our example. Now, as you can see, oops. If we want to size this as a small page, this is kind of the width of a phone, it's going to compress the content. But if we want to display it such as you would on a laptop, you can see that it's very nicely formatting itself. And that's largely due to Bootstrap's ability to compute the very size of the viewport of the window before it goes ahead and inserts content. So let's go down here. This is the big Jumbotron piece at the top that supplies this wide, it has a grayed out background, it has a 36-point font, I believe, right at this top. It's really quite impressive. Probably at one place within your website, you're going to use that Jumbotron. And it's very easy. You just make a div, call it class Jumbotron, and then Bootstrap automatically loads these attributes for all the content. Now, what's cool about the CSS is it applies the, and let's go to the computed. It will apply everything within these attributes to the content of that div. So if you wanted the text to be a certain size, then you could code it as such right in here, the font size being a 14-point within that Jumbotron. And as well, it's coloring a background right here. And these are going to be some of the basic Bootstrap attributes that get applied to it. Naturally, this comes from the fact that you are embedding Bootstrap as an included CSS, much the same way as you might reach and grab another JavaScript file or something else. It acts a little bit like a hyperlink, and that you're going to grab Bootstrap within the CSS folder as it's sitting within your document root. Now what I did is I went ahead and uploaded my CSS. This is overkill, but you guys will be able to basically download or duplicate this repository and then load it exactly as they're working right here, because that CSS folder is right there. So they create Bootstrap to be a very usable framework from the get-go. So let's continue looking through. So that's going to be that Jumbotron element which we talked about. It's kind of one of the signatures of Bootstrap. But to me, what I like to emphasize is the information architecture that's possible within Bootstrap. If we declare a container and then we create a row, that gives us the opportunity to fit various divs. This is a column that has an 8-unit width, and this is a column with a 4-unit width, automatically as we resize the page. Now, even if I resize the page, this still remains a row. So this still remains of type row. That hasn't changed. But certainly, Bootstrap has decided to reformat itself based upon the width. Now, if we were to not use Bootstrap and just do divs by hand, we could make the divs show up the way we wanted, but it wouldn't format or flow as nicely within the page. So Bootstrap gives us a lot of kind of last-minute formatting that looks quite nice. So I have my little project right here, and I have to apologize for my health. Today I have some kind of cold or what have you, so I feel like I'm operating a little bit slower than what I'm used to. I feel like I've aged 20 years all of a sudden. But what I wanted to do this week is integrate a few examples and put them together, because right now you guys are working, you're used to working with data. And so what I've done on this sample is I've gone ahead, and this is the for looping example, is I've included, remember var text from a few weeks back? And I've included that JSON so that you can model the way that you'll handle internet data as it flows over the internet. And then we're going to be formatting it. So you can see this is very familiar. This is going to be very familiar. You're already good at that. And then I'm going to be crafting, I should probably create an output div right here. And you're familiar with how that's going to work. We're going to use a div that should already be there. And what we're going to do for each element within this text array is we're going to do exactly what you're used to doing, which is you're going to create a new div on the page. You're going to insert a paragraph into that, such as you've done in the past. Same exact code as we used. The only difference here is we're going to take that dynamic div that we're appending to the page, but we're going to do something new. And at the last video, we started to talk about this, where we were working with the set attribute. And I just talked about it just very briefly in the last video. So I wanted to supply a lot of code to get you using set attribute. It's very easy. You can just say, take the div that you just created, set the attribute of the class equal to whatever class you're interested in. Now what that will do is it will take that column 4 and that column 8 div, whatever, column 2 or column 3, column 4, and it will add it to the page. So what this example is doing is we're actually adding a new div to the page, and then we're setting its class so that it loads a Bootstrap style div to the page. So as we parse the data, it's going to paste it back onto the page in the format of Bootstrap. Now all I've done here is I've just taken the first name from this array and so you can see that it's beginning to paste this back into the page. So this is the stuff that we began with that was in the sample, and then this row is going to contain Bootstrap formatted divs. So you can see that even as we made these divs, they all fall within the Bootstrap format. So your data is coming off the internet nicely, and then it's entering the forEach. And then as we run it through the forEach, we're adding styling to that div. And of course, that styling is going to be inherited from your Bootstrap. That's way up here. And so I wanted to just say that Bootstrap is a very good way for you to become acquainted with CSS cascading style sheets, but also because you guys are data specialists. As we said, you're cloud ninjas. You're really about skills that a lot of people don't have, which is about getting data from the cloud back down to the page and doing so really securely and with 6 times the speed that many of your counterparts are using. So your excellence right now is in data. So what I've got to do is getting you to do a little bit of basic design. And what I'm going to do is emphasize Bootstrap, because Bootstrap is a wonderful way for you to frame the data that's coming back off the web. And let's face it, JavaScript is advanced stuff. JavaScript is a very special skill set. So you can see how that is beginning to work for you. Now, my second example, and I'm going to try to keep my talk a little bit shorter today, I'm going to begin with the same body of data, and I'm going to use the same forEach. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of JavaScript arithmetic, and I'm going to change up my forEach loop so that we're going to take the item, we're going to take the index of that item, and if we want, we could use the array. Now, this is a legal configuration for the forEach call. Now, you guys are used to using forEach with item, and that's great. But here, we actually need to begin to think about the index, because what we're going to do is we're going to say take the index and divide it by 2. And you should be able to console, you say console.log, the value of the index is x. In case it's it divides by 2 perfectly, it's a new row. And so what I say is I'm going to use an operator here called modulus. And you're probably familiar with the modulus from Java or other programming languages, because modulus represents the remainder when you divide one number by another. Now, if there's no remainder, then it divides quite perfectly by that number. And that may also differentiate whether that is an odd or an even number. An even number divides quite perfectly without any remainder. And so in this case, I actually want to create a div that is 6 units wide. And I want to put my data into a div that's 6 units wide. Now, it just so happens that Bootstrap gives you by default 12 units. And so I want to create a row that has 2 divs. And so each of the divs need to be 6 units wide to fulfill my 12 units. So I say, well, look, if I divide that by 2, that's fine. And that should cover the first 2 rows of that array. And so I want to create a new Bootstrap row every time I have 2 items of data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the index value of the data array that you're already working with here and say, look, every 2 rows, I'd like for you to create a new div of type row. And what that'll do is, and let's load the for looping with the row, and hopefully the demo gods are going to smile on me, which is the way that we like for things to work with for looping. Oh, and it looks like maybe I have to upload that. So let's just load that new one, which we will do. And so we're going to go with the for looping with the row. And you can see that it's very subtle, and the example is very small. All the data is compressed until we have the right width. And then what we have is we have one row that's displaying the first 2 rows. And then we have the second row, which exists with only 1 item in it. So I am really excited because now I have the ability to divide my work up into different rows. So this is 8, this is 4, and then down here. So what I might do to improve this code and do an additional lecture is add a new container, and then whenever we have a row, actually create a new formal row. But I guess the big message I want to put right here is, firstly, your Bootstrap can accompany every div that you make. So you can style every div that you put out there. The divs are the building blocks for your page. So you should think of your page as made of squares, and you should put your data in those squares, right? The divs are boxes. And then because you have a div that can be styled quite beautifully with Bootstrap, you can apply some styling after that div gets built. Now, the great thing about JavaScript is you can both get the data, but then you can control the composition of the page. And now because of Bootstrap, you can control how the page looks. So your data is going to look gorgeous, right? Such as we have right here. So I think we were looking at the Apple website. Apple's got to be one of the great websites out there, if not one of the best and most looked at. And we're really saying, well, these are beautiful imagery, etc. But it looks a whole lot like what you guys are doing right now with your Bootstrap. So let's follow this link. So for example, the menu at the top and the plain text, and then having these divs that are across the page, you guys are going to be able to do this very, very soon. And all this is just text, numbers, button. Very simple stuff. All stuff that you guys are doing right now. And what I love is to show students, some of the best websites in the world, like Apple's, and then to say, you guys are already able to do that. You guys can lay down a site as well. Not quite as well as Apple, because they have a lot of graphic designers, making sweet animations, and they should get credit for that. But you guys can certainly handle data as well as Apple can. So I want to give you some ego right there, that you can lay down stuff with style and with fast-moving data from your static, gorgeous website on Amazon. So all in all, I just want to motivate you. I want to give you some ego and say, if it's out there, if you want to conquer it, you can do it. And most likely you want to use a framework like what we've used, where you try to take off a little bite of something, play around with it, like you've done with my code. Take somebody who knows what they're doing, take their code, play around with it a little bit, and then say, okay, now let's try this. I want to try to style that a little bit. I want to try to make it my own a little bit. And just take little steps and keep working, and eventually you're going to accumulate something really interesting. So this is a small example, and we'll fix it up a little bit. But the big message I want to put out there is this is the hard part. You working with the forEach, working with the index of the forEach, that's very professional web developer stuff. And frankly, if you can have a little taste of that, you can experience it, you can get used to it. Believe me, this coding thing is going to work for you. You're going to grow up using code. It's going to be a part of your life. You're going to come of age, coding. Let me say this: young people who have, a lot of computer science majors, the young people who have exposure to computer science moving up through high school, they just had some privileges coming up. Maybe they had a parent who is a programmer or an engineer. They just had that privilege coming up. And so they look really smart because, frankly, they've had the exposure. And exposure means a lot. So when you look at something as complex, as rigorous as coding, maybe you say, look, I got to take it easy on myself. Don't say that you're not a coder, because you have to at least allow your teacher to expose you to some stuff, right? You have to allow that teacher to bring you up a little bit. But then you say, well, wait a second. Now that I've been shown this stuff, is that hard? I mean, being a coder is a great job because you can kind of make these huge things happen throughout your day that mean a lot to people. So it's just something you should, keep in mind. So anyway, now within this, and I'm going to post this to Git in a second. I realize that I need to push it up to Git. It's still in my Eclipse. You see that if the index divides evenly by 0 based on this modulus, then you should go ahead and make a new row. And I should probably just boost this up a little bit. Probably I can add a variable called container. And I want to create a div there. It's of class container. And then what I want to do is I want to add the dynamic div. And then before I do that, I want to say, okay, for that page, I want to append the child called cont, which is my container. And then I also want to say element append child new row. Now, I don't want to throw something that has some errors in it, but why don't we just take a look, and maybe I'll make a new video that will kind of go through the changes. Example 1 with for looping, cool. And yeah, I'll follow up with another video, just in case I got some some warnings here. But I think you get the big idea. And I just want to encourage you to keep going forward. Now, what's great about this class is we got some time left. You got some nice cushion right now where you can put these skills toward, a micro project and then a final project. So let's also be talking about that and thinking about how do we shape this into a final, deliverable for your next employer, who will be probably pretty psyched to see your new stuff. So good job. Thanks for sticking with it. And hit the subscribe button. Just kidding.